God, in the name of Jesus, we come into your presence to say thank you. We thank you, God, for grace and for mercy and for bringing us to this point in time. We thank you for being our refuge. We thank you for being our provider and our strength. We pray, Lord God, that you would have your way even in this meeting on tonight, in this forum. Bless our guest speaker, bless the interviewer and everybody who will participate. Bless the tech team. Bless our guests on tonight, oh God. Allow them to receive a word that will encourage them to do the work that is necessary to advocate for justice and fairness and equity in this country. Help us to move together towards what is right and be active, that things will change for the better. Help us to show our love one for another. Bless us on tonight, Lord God, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us on tonight. On behalf of the First Baptist Church of Highland Park, our pastor, Dr. Henry P. Davis III, the officers, members, the social justice ministry members, I greet you in the mighty and the matchless name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Good evening, everyone, as I usually say, and thank you for joining us for this serious yet inspiring conversation about how to eliminate the wealth gap between whites and Blacks in this country. We have an exciting, compelling conversation in store for you this evening. Stay on the edge of your seat and hold on. You are in store for a treat and a push. Get ready. Now we'll turn the event over to Mrs. Audrey Chase, the Vice President of the Social Justice Ministry.
Good evening, participants. If many of you have been following the work of the Social Justice Ministry since its inception in May of 2019, you may already know, or you may have heard, that this ministry is committed to engaging the church and the surrounding community in its mission to address injustice. Specifically, it is always our goal to collaborate with each other in order to answer the call for action. We firmly believe that we must engage the passion and the energy of the oppressed as well as others in order to eradicate injustices that lie within our communities. This evening, then, our goal and purpose is embedded in the event title, Engaging Difficult Conversations About Race. And the agenda and conversation tonight is based on a book authored by our guest, Stephen Scott Rogers. It is called A Letter to My White Friends and Colleagues: What You Can Do Right Now to Help the Black Community. This conversation is indeed part of the work of the social justice activism and community uplift. This evening, our goal is to further inform, further energize, and further provide strategies for our participants to identify their voice, their strength, and the options available to them to engage this work and to address various injustices. Having laid this groundwork, I am now pleased to present to you the illustrious head of the First Baptist Church of Highland Park, our pastor, Pastor Henry P. Davis III. Pastor Davis.
Greetings, and delighted to have you to join us tonight. We're all looking forward. Our social justice ministry has always done a wonderful job under the leadership of Dr. Boyd in terms of keeping us apprised of significant issues that go on in our lives. And again, that is the goal of the church, that we would be able to connect to society, and that we would be able to have real life conversations, not just mythical things, but things that we can connect the scripture and really connect it with everyday life. And so that's really the goal of our social justice ministry. They've done a fantastic job with all of the projects that they have undertaken, and from voter registration and just trying to keep our congregation and beyond knowledgeable of issues that are very much important to us. And so I certainly greet all of you with the joy of Jesus. I'm looking forward, as you are, to the discussion with Stephen Rogers, and we thank you for joining us tonight. God bless you, and let's get ready for a fantastic evening.
Thank you, Pastor Davis. I know that many of you already know that when we seek to help others understand what we can't precisely convey, we're often reminded to just keep it simple. Well, I don't know that simplicity will suffice tonight, as the guest presenter for this evening, Mr. Rogers, exudes far more. I beg your indulgence for just a couple of minutes so that you will see exactly what I mean. Mr. Rogers received his Bachelor of Arts degree from Williams College. He holds a postgraduate degree from Harvard Business School, where he was the MBA class of 1957 senior lecturer in general management. Prior to Harvard Business School, Professor Rogers taught in the MBA and PhD programs at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. He received the Outstanding Professor Award for the Executive MBA program, not one time, not two times, but 26 times, and daytime program twice. Both of those reflect records that he set. The book that serves as the basis of this conversation tonight was published in 2021. Preceding that accomplishment, however, the fourth edition of his book, Entrepreneurial Finance, Finance and Business Strategies for the Serious Entrepreneur, was published. You see, Professor Rogers originally published the book in 2002. He's also authored 30 Harvard Business School case studies and recorded podcasts, many of them which were uploaded to Black Enterprise magazine. In 2020, Mr. Rogers was extremely busy. He became an advisor and part owner of AfricanAncestry.com. He became advisor, joined the Steens Foundation as an advisor to develop an economic plan for a poverty-stricken Black community in Chicago. He joined the University of Miami Business School as an executive in residence, where he teaches entrepreneurial finance in the Master of Science finance program. And he received the James W. Hall Award for Entrepreneurship and Ethics in Business, presented by the Dominican University. In 2019, he toured 10 historically Black colleges and universities, where he taught a workshop in entrepreneurial finance, further raising the awareness and motivation of many young people of color. In 2017, he received the Black Brilliance in Service Award from Harvard's Black Law Students Association. And in that very same year, Poets and Quants magazine selected him as one of our favorite MBA professors of 2017. In 2016, he was a volunteer professor at the United States Military Academy at West Point, where he received the West Point Cadets Sword for expert teaching and professionalism. He's taught in 9 countries outside of the United States. He's owned and operated 2 manufacturing and 1 retail operation. He worked in consulting and venture capital firms. He owned a real estate investment company. He's part owner of a WNBA team. He gained experience in governance and corporate boards. He's earned more achievement awards than I could ever mention tonight. And he found time to complete 5 triathlons. So, and I'm sure that one of the greatest rewards that he has achieved is that of being father to 2 daughters, Akila and Ariel. It gives me great pleasure to present this phenomenal, intelligent, straightforward, highly sought after, inspiring, creative, and solution-focused human being called Stephen Scott Rogers. Good evening again, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Ms. Audrey. Thank you very much. That was an awesome introduction, and it made me think about one of the great thespians, how he would respond to that introduction, and that would be Sir Samuel Davis Jr., who would probably say it's really groovy when a young cat like you digs a man. So thank you very much.
You're so welcome. So we're going to get started. Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am. Let's do it.
Okay. So just a little bit in reference to me, my training and professional work has been in mental health. And my early mental health training and experience reminds me that there's a reason behind every action. So to get this conversation underway tonight, I thought I would ask you to share whatever and whoever created the perfect storm for this informative and well-researched book. In other words, why did you write it?
I wrote the book in response to the murder of George Floyd. As we all know, on May 25th, 2020, this man was needlessly murdered by the authorities. And at that time, the world and the country and the Black community in particular was up in arms, and rightfully so. And my daughter, who was 34 years old, Ariel, she worked for a financial technology company down in North Carolina, and I'm in Chicago. And she reached out to me and she said, Dad, the Black community is hurting. She said, please speak to the Black community as if you were the president. And so with that request on her part, I created a podcast. And that was 6 weeks after George Floyd's murder that she reached out to me. So it was in July. So I created a podcast that was targeted to a Black audience. And the podcast was titled, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, and I'm Sad and I'm Angry. And in that podcast, I implored Black people to do three things. One is I implored them to take care of themselves. I said, this is a pandemic going on. Please make sure that you're healthy and you remain healthy. Number two, I said, continue your protesting. A young Black man has been murdered and it should not have happened. And there needs to be protests to make this country aware of the fact that this is not acceptable. So continue your protesting. And number three, I said, help white people to help us, because I remembered, and what came to mind was what Malcolm X did when he was giving speeches at universities. And after one speech, a young white woman came up to him and she said, Malcolm, how can I help the Black community? And she said, what can I do? And his answer was nothing. And he said he always regretted that answer because he thought it was a teachable moment. And I saw the same thing happening on the part of some Blacks out of frustration, because some Blacks, when whites were asking them, what can I do now to help? They would say, I don't know, don't ask me. You created this problem. I didn't create the problem. So I just thought that I would be very intentional about giving some advice as to how white people can help us. And therefore, I asked Black people to make sure that they ask white people to help us. And the primary reason is because they have all the money. So in response to that, white audiences took note of the podcast. Some of them reached out to me telling me thank you. They were happy to have heard it. And then I decided, let me write a book specifically targeting a white audience now, and specifically saying what it is that I want you to do to help our community. And Audrey, it has always been my position. I'm a businessman. And I look at things through the lenses of finances and commerce. And it was always my position that the great schism that exists between Blacks and whites is primarily the result of the wealth gap. That Black people are financially poor and white people are financially wealthy. And that there's a wealth gap that exists that is tenfold on the part of whites, where the average net worth of a white family is approximately $170,000 compared to the average net worth of a Black family at $17,000. And therefore we have a delta, we have a difference of $153,000 in the wealth gap. And if you look at the financial challenge that Black folks have, most of it is because of that wealth gap. Poverty is poverty. Symptoms of poverty are high crime. Symptoms of poverty are poor health care. Those things are just symptoms of the bigger problem that we have and that we face, and that is this wealth gap. And it's my thesis for this book, and the book was written to inform and to educate, and to inform people of how did we get into this situation. And it's my thesis that this was intentionally done to Black people by white federal government and state governments. That the federal and state governments intentionally enrich whites while simultaneously intentionally impoverish Blacks, such that today, Audrey, 35% of the Black community has zero net worth. In Boston, where I used to teach at Harvard Business School, the Boston Globe did a study a few years ago looking at race relations between Blacks and whites. And what they found was that the wealth gap between Blacks and whites in Boston was even worse. And that is, the average white family in Boston had a net worth in excess of $250,000 compared to $8 for the average Black family. I didn't say $80. I didn't say $800. I didn't say $8,000. I said $8. Yes. And it's my position that this wealth disparity was intentionally done to hurt Black people, and it was intentionally done to subsidize the wealth of white people. So this book lays out in two parts, if you will, what caused the wealth gap, and then secondly, how can we close it?
Okay. Well, certainly you do describe this wealth gap as an intentional and maliciously created reality. That is how you describe it, this wealth gap between Blacks and whites. So talk to us a little bit more about what caused it.
Yeah.
What were the elements that caused it?
And I write about three things in the book that caused this wealth gap. The first one was slavery, which was a federal government mandate. Blacks in America and on American soil were enslaved for 246 years. That's 246 years. That's 12 different generations where wealth was transferred from one white family to the other, to another, for 12 generations. Contrasting that to the realities for Black people where no wealth was transferred for 246 years. In essence, slavery was a government mandate subsidy program for white wealth creation, while at the same time, everything was done to ensure that Blacks never attained any kind of wealth. The result of that 246 years of enslavement, which is a mandate by the federal government, and it wasn't done because whites were being mean to Black people, it was done solely for the purpose of enriching white people. And such the result of that is, one scholar said, if you stop white wealth creation right now, it would take Black people over 225 years to catch up. And think about that. That 225-year period is very close to 246 years of enslavement. And what that says to us is, because of enslavement, that says to us, it's better to get a head start than it is to run fast. White folks got a head start. The federal government subsidized that wealth creation for them on our backs for 246 years. And then that was followed amazingly after the 13th Amendment was passed in 1865, abolishing slavery. What happened was the governments, the state governments, especially in the South, not limited to the South though, but state governments in the South said, and white people in the South said, we can't let these Black people get away. A lot of Black people were leaving the South and they were trying to get up north. And white people, even in newspapers, you see articles in newspapers where white says, we cannot afford to let this Black labor get away from us. So they engaged in propaganda. They told Blacks and put it in newspapers, if you go north, you're gonna freeze to death. They did everything they could to try to maintain the presence of Black people in the South, in those states, solely for the purpose of gaining wealth from their labor. So what they did also then, in addition to the propaganda, they passed what are called Black codes, C-O-D-E-S. And Black codes basically were laws that were passed by the state that resulted in imprisonment of Black people for the most menial alleged crimes possible. Those menial crimes included walking on the wrong side of the street, that you could get arrested for whistling while walking. You could get arrested for, if you were walking with your spouse, you walked on the wrong side of the spouse. And the purpose and the intent for this was to fine Black people so that the money would go into the coffers of the state budget, and then they could finance and use the Black people and retain them down in the South. For example, in Louisiana, 92% of the Louisiana budget one year came from finding Black people guilty of Black codes, fining them. Black people could not pay the fine. And in response to them not being able to pay the fine, they were in prison. And then white individuals and white companies like US Steel would pay those fines. And in return, they would get the labor of that Black person. And they had paid nothing to the Black person whatsoever. One thing that people don't realize that in 1865, after the 13th Amendment was passed, Black people in the South had to have working papers on their person. If you didn't have working papers showing you were employed, you were in violation of what was called vagrancy laws. Vagrancy laws were under the umbrella of Black codes. So you could get arrested for that. So Black people would be standing at the train stations trying to go, wait for the train to go north, entire Black families. The policemen, white policemen would come and they would arrest them because they didn't have any papers showing that they were gainfully employed. They would take the Black adults to jail. And if they had children, the female child would be indentured to work for a white family for free till she was 18. And if it was a male, a Black male child, he was indentured to work for a white family until he was 21 with no compensation whatsoever. Again, think about this whole compensation, absence of compensation in exchange for free labor. That is designed to help white people and designed to hurt Black people. So you had these Black codes which existed for 60 years. So 246 years of slavery, followed by 60 years of Black code. Approximately 800,000 Black people were arrested under these Black codes. And then that was followed by 40 years of redlining. And redlining occurred between 1930 to the 1950s. And redlining was when the federal government of America made the decision that they wanted to create a middle class. Audrey, before the 1930s, for the most part, people in America were either wealthy or they were poor. There was no such thing as a 30-year mortgage. The only kind of mortgages that existed were 5-year mortgages. Therefore, the only people who could afford a mortgage were wealthy people. So after the Second World War, the federal government said, we want to create a middle class. And as we all know, the foundation for creating any kind of wealth is home ownership. So the federal government created what was called an agency, the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration. And the job of the FHA was to come up with a means to which housing could be created for middle-class Americans. So what they did was they went to the banks, the FHA, and they said to banks, they said, if you give this new security called a 30-year mortgage to applicants, you don't have to take all the risk. If you give applicants a 30-year mortgage to buy a home, we will guarantee, the federal government will guarantee 90% of that mortgage. Therefore, you only have at risk 10%. So white banks they flooded communities with mortgages. And I say white banks because there was a caveat to that order by the federal government. And that was, these mortgages would not be guaranteed for Black people. It's very explicit language that says that this is not hyperbole on my part. It's not exaggeration on my part. Literally, there's documents, and it says it in the book. It cites those examples where it says mortgages for Negroes will not be permitted. And it's also said mortgages in Black communities will never be approved under this program. So the result of that is a bank like the Bank of Italy. The Bank of Italy flooded the Italian community with mortgages. They flooded, and rightfully so. And they flooded the Italian community with mortgages. And mortgages, Audrey, at that time, just like they are today, are extremely profitable securities for banks. They make a lot of money off of those. So the Bank of Italy did so well beginning with those kind of mortgages, that today the Bank of Italy is now known as the Bank of America. This kind of experience was not something that Black-owned banks could experience, because Black-owned banks were not the beneficiaries of mortgage guarantees by the federal government. The federal government, for example, they said to a Levitt family, the first suburb ever created in America was created outside of New York, called Levittown. The Levitt family went to their bankers in the 1930s, and they went to their bankers and they said, we want to build in this vast empty land that we now own, we want to build 17,000 homes. And we want to sell these homes primarily to GIs, new veterans who are coming from the Second World War. And the bank in turn went to the federal government and asked the federal government if they would guarantee the development fees of the mortgages for those homes. The federal government said yes. So the Levitt family built 17,000 homes, but there was a caveat, and the federal government said none of those homes could be sold to a Negro. And so the Levitt family sold 17,000 homes, many of them to veterans. Some veterans paid as little as $100 for their home when you factored in their GI Bill. Today, those homes are worth $700,000 to $800,000. So look at the wealth that exists that went to whites and did not go to Blacks. The amazing thing about that is white soldiers who had been in the war, who were enemies from Germany and Italy, they could come to America and actually get those mortgages guaranteed by the federal government. Whereas a white GI veteran who served his own country and had possibly imprisoned those white soldiers, he could not get a mortgage guarantee by the federal government. So the result of that is that Black people were denied the opportunity to buy homes other than via the gray market. And the gray market existed, and it was called contract buying. And contract buying existed in this fashion, and that is a white person would buy the home, and then they would sell the home to a Black family, but they would sell it to a Black family on time, meaning over a period of time. They would charge the Black family a premium. Sometimes the price that they would charge Black families could be as much as 20 times the original cost of the home. They would charge them usury fees. I've seen interest rates on those homes as well. And then if the Black family was paying and had an agreement to pay for 30 years, if they missed a payment or they were late for a payment in year 15, the white owner could take the property from them and give it to someone else. So Black people were under this enormous stress trying to buy homes via this gray market. My grandparents were some of the people who ended up buying homes on contract. In fact, in Chicago, 85% of all homes purchased by Black people in the 1950s were purchased by contract, via contract. And what we know is, from empirical research today, that the Black person who bought a home via contract, they ended up paying $71,000 more for their home as a result of buying it via contract than had they been able to buy it via a regular mortgage from a bank. They ended up paying also $530 a month more for their mortgage than they would have paid had they gotten that mortgage from a bank. My grandparents were victims of that. They came up from Louisiana. They settled in Chicago. My grandfather worked at the steel mill, had a well-paying job that he had been on for quite a while. And he was denied a mortgage. They could not get a mortgage because of their race, because they were Black. And so he and my grandmother bought the house via contract from a white seller. And they were paying the white seller for 4 years. And after the 4th year, they were finally able to get a mortgage. And I had those documents, and they got a mortgage from Sears Roebuck and Company. So as a result of that, they weren't completely victimized by the contract seller. But this was what happened to Black people. And the result is we got behind. You know, right. The way that the federal government decided which communities they would not provide mortgages to, they rated communities A, B, C, or D. And the D communities, they literally drew a red line around the communities that they rated as D. The D communities were communities occupied by Black people or communities close to where Black people live. So even some white people couldn't buy homes if their homes were in close proximity to a Black community. So what some people would do when they were told they could not buy a home because it was too close to a Black community, they would erect a wall that separated their property from the Black community. And that's what made them qualify for the home. So what we see from those three examples, Audrey, we see this wealth disparity that was created. And the result of that wealth disparity being created is today, if you look at the average net worth of a white high school dropout, the average net worth of a white high school dropout is greater than the average net worth of a Black person with a college degree. That is because of white people being able to transfer wealth generation from generation, and we can't catch up. And some people say education is the key. I'm here as a well-educated man who tells you we can be as educated as we want to. We'll never catch up just simply by getting more education. What was done to us was done intentionally to create this disparity that exists today. So not only is a white high school college graduate has greater net worth, we see the same. A white high school graduate has a greater net worth on average than a Black person with a master's degree. And it goes on and on. So how was the wealth gap created? Those three things are what I identified as the culprits in the wealth gap being created to the tune of $153,000 between Blacks and whites.
And when you hear the details, it's always chilling. I mean,
yes.
it arouses lots of emotion.
Absolutely.
When you hear those details. So let's move from the cause to the actual recommendations. I've read your recommendations. Each one of them are very bold, very concrete. So for starters, I know that you completely agree with a Black banker who said it's the best way to support Black wealth creation is simple: bank Black, even if you're white. So what are your specific thoughts about depositing money in Black banks?
Okay. Before I answer that, let me just go back and say, this book is comment relative to what you said at the end of my comment. This book was written with the objective, and it's targeting white people. And the reason it's targeting white people is they have the money. Sort of that old adage, why did you rob a bank? Well, that's where the money is. And so this book is targeting white people because they have the money. At the same time, everything that I recommend I'm doing or I've done, and I recommend Black people do the same. But the reality is the money is in the hands of, in the coffers of white people who we're asking in essence to share wealth. My 4 recommendations, 1 being deposit money in a Black-owned bank, the 2 being support HBCUs, 3 being support reparations, and 4 being spending money with Black-owned businesses. So let's talk about the first one, Black-owned banks. What we know, and there's only 21 Black-owned banks in the country, and those Black-owned banks have had throughout history. And the only reason Black-owned banks were created was because white-owned banks would take deposits from Black people, but they wouldn't loan any money to Black people. And so Black banks were created solely to fill that vacuum. And Black-owned banks, unfortunately, if you think about the preface that I gave, and that is, we are people who are financially challenged because we just don't have enough money. And even if we did all of the 3 things that I recommend other than reparations, we will never catch up to white people. But despite that, I still want us to still try to make an effort to do so. And one is to put money into Black-owned banks. Black-owned banks have primarily gotten deposits from poor Black people. And so if you get money from poor people, what you're going to get is you're going to get low deposits, small deposits, and you're going to get deposits that get frequently taken out because people need to live day to day. And so the result of that is Black-owned banks experience high expense ratios. And Black-owned banks, therefore, what we need and what we know is Black-owned banks will send money to the Black community. We know that, for example, that 70% of mortgages given by Black-owned banks go to Black people, whereas less than 0.5% mortgages by white-owned banks go to Black people. So we know if Black-owned banks have more money, they'll send money to the Black community. We know that Black-owned banks, 80% of their commercial business loans go to Black people. Less than 0.5% of commercial loans by white-owned banks go to Black people. So we know that Black-owned banks will send money, but these banks are financially challenged because they've had to rely on people who don't have a lot of money. Therefore, I am recommending for those Black, white people who are sincerely interested in doing something to help the Black community, I'm encouraging them and asking them to make major deposits into Black-owned banks. And you know, if you make a deposit up to $250,000 in any bank, Black-owned or any bank, it is federally guaranteed. So it's no risk. So I'm asking whites to make, and I'm asking specifically for them to deposit on an annual basis at least 9.29% of their annual savings in a Black-owned bank. It's risk-free, it's guaranteed by the federal government, and the banks will be able to use that money to send it to the Black community. And I'm asking them to put the money in Black-owned banks and leave it there for 3 to 5 years. Don't take it out. And the reason I have cited 9.29% is because that represents the 9 minutes and 29 seconds that Officer Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's neck. And so I'm asking whites to deposit at least 9.29% of their annual savings in Black-owned banks because we need their money.
Mm-hmm. That's a great recommendation. So let's move on to the next one, which concerns HBCUs. Now, I proudly proclaim my love for my HBCUs, as I know that other HBCU graduates do as well, and I donate to it. What benefit would those who never attended an HBCU derive from donating to HBCUs?
Beautiful. I never matriculated at an HBCU, as you cited in my introduction, after I retired from Harvard Business School in 2019. And when I was at Harvard Business School, I created a new course called Black Business Leaders and Entrepreneurship. And I created it because at Harvard Business School, we were teaching about business excellence, and none of the protagonists that we were teaching about were Black. And so what we were teaching our students was that Black people didn't matter, that Black people weren't brilliant. And so I decided to write the case studies that you mentioned. And then what happened was I got such a joy out of teaching primarily Black students. That's who enrolled in my class. There are 14 different schools at Harvard, the law school, the business school, the divinity school. 12 out of the 14 schools, students from 12 out of the 14 schools cross-registered into my course. So I had this class that had these brilliant Black people in the class, and it was one of my greatest joys in life. And after I retired, I decided I wanted to get that experience again. So I decided to do a tour of HBCUs, and I was going to go to 12 schools. I went to 10 before COVID kicked in, and I taught a 90-minute seminar, Entrepreneurial Finance for Black Entrepreneurs. When we talk about HBCUs, which again were in existence since the 1850s, and they were only created, and most of them were created by white people. A lot of people, Black people, don't know that. They were primarily founded by white folks. Spelman, for example, is the Rockefeller's daughter's name. Morehouse College. Morehouse was the secretary of a white organization that created Morehouse. Most of the organizations that created HBCUs were religious affiliates of some kind. Yeah. And so, but most of them were white organizations. And so I am imploring whites to follow in the footsteps of their ancestors and to send money to to HBCUs. And I'm asking them to emulate Lindsay Scott. And Lindsay Scott, as you well know, Mackenzie Scott, she was one of the founders of Amazon, formerly married to Jeff Bezos. And she, after her divorce, made a decision. She wants to give some of her billions away. And so in the last 2 years, she has given over $600 million to HBCUs. And I'm asking others to do the same. And the reason, and most people will typically say, tell me the value of HBCUs. In response, most people will talk about the historical relevance of HBCUs. The fact that Thurgood Marshall matriculated at an HBCU, Langston Hughes went to an HBCU. But when asked the question, what are their relevance today? I believe we have to come up with a different answer. And this is my answer about what's their relevance today. And that is, there's 101 HBCUs that has enrolled 300,000 primarily Black students. 70% of those students are on Pell Grants, which means they come from households that have annual income of less than $26,000 a year. That's 70% of HBCUs primarily teaching children from poverty-stricken households, whereas only 30% of students at white schools come and qualify for Pell Grants. So we need HBCUs because HBCUs will they will admit and they will educate those who predominantly white institutions probably don't want anything to do with people who come from poverty-stricken families, which was the case with me and my family when I went to college. But the schools don't want to be completely filled with those. And so what we also know is the average endowment of an HBCU is a mere $12 million. Despite that fact, HBCUs have done a Herculean job. And in the words of Pulitzer Prize winner, the good sister who is now at Howard University, she said, HBCUs have always punched above their weight class, and meaning that they produce far more than what they should have, given the fact that they're so few and they have such small budgets. So what we know today, we know that 80% of all Black judges attended an HBCU. We know that 50% of all Black lawyers attended an HBCU. 50% of all Black doctors today attended an HBCU. 40% of all Black engineers attended an HBCU. Think of the value that HBCUs have to the American economy and American society. If there was no HBCUs, I believe that over 50% of the students who are at HBCUs would not be in school because, as I stated earlier, predominantly white institutions do not want to be flooded with poor Black students. But HBCUs take poor Black students and look what they do. They take straw and then they turn it into gold with the number of professions that they put people into. We know that 100% of all American vice presidents attended an HBCU. So it is imperative that more money finds its way to HBCUs. And I'm imploring whites to send that money there. Many of them are not aware of HBCUs. So part of it is an act of omission on their part versus an act of commission. They didn't conspire not to put any money. They just sort of thought of HBCUs. They never even thought of them. And many people have read my book said, I had no idea that that these schools existed. And so we need to make people aware of it. And then we need to ask them to put money. My favorite HBCU, and I was not even aware of this school myself, but my favorite HBCU is down in North Carolina. And I visited it when I visited the 10 schools, and that is Bennett College. And Bennett College, most people have heard of the all-female school, Spelman, which is named after the Rockefeller's daughter, but they're not aware of Bennett College. And Bennett College, I visited there, and it's a beautiful, small liberal arts college campus. And I saw one of the best mottos that I've ever seen in my life at Bennett College. And what they said was, Bennett College, where you come as a girl to meet the woman that you will become. I said, wow, that's powerful. I said, Bennett College makes me want to be a woman so I can come down there and matriculate there. But it was such a fascinating and joyful experience to be there. And so the HBCU story is one that is extraordinarily important to America. It's extraordinarily important to our community, and they need support.
Absolutely. And having been very intricately involved with HBCU tours over the last, dozen years, I wholeheartedly support this recommendation. This moves us to the next one, spend money with Black-owned businesses. That's your next recommendation. What do you think people need to know? How do you move people to take this pledge?
Again, be mindful. And the book was written for the purpose of, and I always say it was targeting people who have a logical mind and a kind heart. And the logical mind is, once I tell you the facts, hopefully logically you'll start seeing, yes, this makes sense. And then your heart kicks in and say, I want to be a part of the solution to the problem. Black businesses, they're the largest employer, private employer of Black people in the country. The largest employer of Black people is the government. but the largest private employer of Black people are Black-owned businesses. Therefore, if you want to help the Black community, then you must support Black-owned businesses. And with Black-owned businesses are created, and if they grow, what we know is they will hire Black people. There's a scholar by the name of Dr. Timothy Bates. He's a white scholar, but he wrote a book called Banking on Black Enterprise. And in that book, he cites and does this fascinating research that shows that white-owned businesses, for the most part, will not hire Black people. Even if the white-owned business is in a predominantly Black community, it will not necessarily hire Black people. Conversely, he showed that Black-owned businesses will hire Black people. Black-owned businesses in Black communities will hire Black people. Black-owned businesses, even in white communities, will hire and employ Black people. It's just an empirical fact. And so if that's the case, and if Black people need jobs, who are the best and most likely people to employ Black people? Black-owned businesses. So we need to spend money with Black-owned businesses so that they can grow and they can create more jobs. Because people who have jobs are self-sufficient, and self-sufficient people live in healthy communities. And therefore, I am imploring white people to spend at least 9.29% of their annual budget with Black-owned businesses. Again, I'm not asking people to do something that I don't do and I have not done. On an annual basis, I spend 35 to 50% of my annual budget with Black-owned businesses. I don't believe there's anybody, for example, in the country who has gone to more Black restaurants than I've gone to. If I go to a new city, I Google Black-owned restaurants, and I go to that Black-owned restaurant because it's a fast way for me to put money in the Black economy there. When I went to Australia, when I went out of the country, I also Googled Black-owned restaurants because I wanted to find those even outside of the country. But I walk the talk relative to supporting Black-owned businesses. My law firm is a Black female-owned law firm. My accounting firm is a Black female-owned accounting firm. I'm not talking about white companies that employ Black people. I'm talking about Black-owned companies that will create jobs for Black people. My dermatology firm is a Black-owned dermatology firm. I put money in Black-owned banks. My Black caterers, the caterers that I use for my Thanksgiving dinners, when I have family and friends over and I tell them that I did all the cooking, I'm lying, but all of the food came from Black catering firms. My real estate, I own a real estate company. I have 4 Black general contractors working for me right now. Everything that I do is centered around, is there a Black person who can do this for me? And let me be real clear with y'all. I'm very focused on Black. I don't say minority, I don't say underserved communities, I don't say anything other than Black, because what I find is when we start including everybody else, Black people tend to get diluted. And there's something that says typically on the part of some whites as well as other races, they would rather do something for anybody other than Black people. And so I implore Black people not to be part of or complicit in our own demise in getting help by being so thoughtful. And it's all right to be inclusive, but not when you get excluded as a result of that. So Black-owned businesses are essential to the Black community in terms of health because they create jobs, and therefore we need Black-owned businesses to grow, and we need money from those people who have money to spend money at Black-owned businesses.
Amen. So this takes us to the last recommendation, reparations. And I'm sure that what I'm getting ready to say is absolutely true. The concept of reparations is highly favored by some as the only means to ensure equality. However, it's viewed as a waste of mental energy by other people. So, Mr. Rogers, please make the case for reparations.
Well, I'm in the former camp. It's not a waste of mental energy. And in fact, I would fall back on what President Kennedy said when he was asked, why are we going to the moon? And I think in 1963, he said, we're going because it's hard. And the reality is, yes, this is going to be a hard climb, but that's all right. There's a history of reparations, not only in America, but actually throughout the world, as we well know. Right. The most prominent one is the rightful reparations that were paid by the German government to Jews. And I would argue that the reparations that they have paid Jews is actually not enough given what they did in terms of the concentration camps. But the German government has paid in excess of $90 billion to Jews for the travesties committed in the concentration camp. When reparations were brought up in Germany, it was like 80% of the German citizens were against reparations being paid. Reparations, for the most part, are never very favorable things in terms of popular. There was violence in the streets in Germany when the government was talking about paying Jews reparations, but the government decided to do the right thing. And so this whole notion of it being tough, so what? That is inevitable that it's going to be a tough. So we see evidence of it occurring overseas in terms of the German government paying reparations to Jews. We also see it in the United States. In the Second World War, America, the federal government of America made the decision that Japanese Americans probably weren't going to be loyal to America because we were fighting in the Second World War, Japan, we were fighting Italy and Germany. But American government said Japanese Americans, those who were not of European descent, though they probably weren't going to be loyal. So what they did was they imprisoned 120,000 Japanese Americans. They literally took them from their homes, put them in train cars, and shipped them to concentration camps or internment camps. And they were prisons in essence because they had barbed wire at the top of the fences and guards with guns. So 120,000 Japanese Americans were imprisoned for 3 years during the Second World War. Under the President Reagan's administration, he apologized to Japanese Americans for that. And he said, not only am I giving you an apology, but I'm giving you reparations. And the reparations given to Japanese Americans was $20,000. So 80,000 Japanese Americans received from our federal government one check for $20,000 as part of to repair the damage an effort to repair some of the damage that the federal government had done to them. And so we see reparations actually having precedent here in the United States. Amazingly, after slavery and during the slavery, reparations were given. And it's amazing because the reparations that were given by the federal government were given to white slave owners. They were given, the federal government, after the abolition of slavery, gave 979 white slave owners checks to the tune of $300 for each slave that they lost from emancipation. And then it stopped. But the federal government actually gave reparations checks to white slave owners because they said damage had been done to them for the emancipation of what had been deemed at one time their assets, a human bondage. The amazing thing about that is that's not the only country that gave reparations to white slave owners. When I spoke to international audiences, I like to share them because many of them like to think that racism and slavery and those hardcore racist attitudes and actions only occurred in the States. But I'm here to tell you it occurred all over the world, especially on the part of Europeans. While slavery wasn't in Europe, it was all mandated and controlled in the Caribbean countries. So countries like the Bahamas, countries like Jamaica, those were hotbeds for British slave owners to enslave Black people and take them to those colonies. And they populated those colonies. And the reason why Jamaica is all Black is because they are all descendants of Black people who were brought there by the British government to work in the sugarcane industry because Britain needed sugar desperately. So they brought them to Jamaica and they worked in sugarcane industry. And the lifespan of a person working in the sugarcane industry as a slave was a mere 8 years. They would die 8 years after they arrived, whereas in America it was 22 years. And I'm not arguing that slavery was better in America than there, but what you had in those British colonies, you had slavery being thought of, we're gonna work these people to death. We're gonna work them and then just we're replenishing. But all of that was done and mandated under the British government, the federal government. So in 1834, when Britain abolished slavery, and be in mind, the United Kingdom, slavery existed in the United Kingdom in the 1500s. It didn't start in America until the 1600s, okay? But the United Kingdom abolished slavery. And when they abolished slavery, they took out a loan for 20 million pounds. And they took that 20 million pounds and they paid white slave owners who were losing their slaves, Black enslaved people. That 20 million pounds today is approximately 16 billion pounds. That loan that was taken out was finally paid off in 2015. 2015. So you had Black folks in the United Kingdom paying taxes that were being used to pay reparations to white slave owners who had enslaved their ancestors. So we have this evidence of reparations occurring. And for Black Americans, unfortunately, it never happened. The closest we ever got to reparations being paid to Black people was in 1865, when the Union soldiers were defeating the Confederate soldiers. And the Union soldiers, we were trouncing them, and we were beating them. And one example is General Sherman, who was leading a troop of Union soldiers through Savannah, Georgia. And as he was marching through Savannah, Georgia, Black people were leaving plantations. And this was happening all over the South. Black people were leaving plantations as Union soldiers were winning and defeating the Confederates. And Black people would leave the plantations. And in the case of Savannah, Georgia, and General Sherman, they left the plantation and they started following and walking behind all the Union soldiers. General Sherman sent a letter to President Lincoln. And the letter said, "We have all of these Negroes following us. What should we do with them?" President Lincoln sent the letter back. And the letter said, and I quote, ask the Negroes, what do they want? Okay? Ask the Negroes, what do they want? So General Sherman convened, it was Nicole Hannah-Jones. That's who I was referring to about the Pulitzer Prize lady. Somebody just set it up on the chat. But General Sherman convened a meeting at one of the five-star hotels, former five-star hotel in Savannah, Georgia. And the meeting was comprised of 20 clergymen, some of them as young as 26 years old. Many of them had been enslaved, some of them enslaved for as much as 50 years. Some had never been enslaved. So General Sherman said, when the war is over and the 13th Amendment is passed and you're free, what do you want? And the Black people were unanimous, the Black clergymen, they were unanimous. They said, we want land. And they wanted land because they were aware of the history of Black people controlling land. And that awareness came from when the Black people in Haiti overthrew the French government. They overthrew the French government, Toussaint Louverture, and Black people and Black enslaved people in America were saying, those are our heroes. And what happened with Haiti was the Black people overthrew the French government, kicked them out. And what the Black people in Haiti said is, we're no longer going to plant sugarcane. That is the crop of the enslaver, the colonizer. We're going to plant food items that we can live off of. And so with that declaration, and many Black people were aware of that who had been enslaved, they said with that declaration, the French government, and not only the French government, but the American government said this is bad for America. For Black people to overthrow white people and then say, we're going to take control of our own lives. This is bad for America that has slavery. So America and Britain, they decided to put a blockade around Haiti, stopping products from going in and out. America decided to call their loans that they had given to Haiti. And in essence, they said, we're going to do all of this until you agree to pay France back what you owe them as a result of them colonizing you. So when we see a country like Haiti today, Haiti is what it is because this was an effort done intentionally by whites to enslave them. That's not because those people are lazy or poor, just like the same in America. This was done intentionally. And so, but Black people in America were aware of what happened in Haiti. And when they were on the plantations, they said, we're free, we want that. We want to get our land, and we're not going to plant the product of the enslaver. We're not going to plant cotton. We're going to plant food that we can eat. And white people were scared of that reality and said, we have to stop this. So they were asked, how many of you want to live amongst white people after you're free? You want land, and you want land that you can farm your own self so that you can feed yourselves. And then they said, do you want it amongst white people or do you want it separately? This was not unanimous. The younger clergyman said, we want it amongst white people. We want to integrate. The older one said, no, we can't trust white people. Their past has been such that they never probably would be fair to us. And so after that meeting, General Sherman left, and then what came out of that meeting was called Special Order Number 15. And Special Order Number 15, which was a federal government mandate, it said this. It said, the government of the United States, we're going to take 400,000 acres from the Confederates. And the Confederates who we defeated, we're going to try them for treason for what they did. And we're going to hang a lot of them for treasonous acts. And then we're going to take 400,000 acres of land that was owned by the Confederates, and we're going to partition that into 40-acre lots. And then we're going to not give it to the new freedmen, we're going to sell it to the new freedmen at $1.25 an acre. And then they said, oh, by the way, the military has all of these mules around. We're going to take a mule and we'll give it to each family that has 40 acres. So the federal government actually began issuing some of the land to the new freedmen that they had taken from the Confederates. This was some form of reparations, if you will, of some kind. And then what happened? President Lincoln gets murdered. He gets murdered by John Booth, who was an avid racist, who, it was documented, hated President Lincoln because Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and moving to pass the 13th Amendment, freeing Black folks. And the Emancipation Proclamation, all of y'all know, was not done to free Black people in the North. It was only done to free Black people in the South. So Black people in the North, when the Emancipation Proclamation was sent, was not freeing Black people who were not part of the Confederacy. If you were not a part of the Confederacy, slavery was still in existence in that part of the country. Only if for slavery in the Confederate hands. So Lincoln gets murdered, and his vice president, Andrew Johnson, he says something then in 1865 that we have heard repeatedly today, and that is, those Negroes don't deserve something for free. They should work for it. He said, this is unfair to white people for this land to go to the hands of these new freedmen. And so what Andrew Johnson made the decision to do was, after Lincoln was murdered, he pardoned the Confederates. Mm-hmm. He told them, all you have to do is apologize for what you did. So he pardoned them. They didn't get hanged. He pardoned them and he returned their land to them. And so that was the only effort that was close to anything resembling reparations to us. And it didn't happen. And the reality is, even if everybody did the three things that I recommended, Black banks, Black businesses, HBCUs, if you did all that, we would never catch up with white people. And the reason is because they had such a huge head start in wealth creation that the only way that that wealth gap can be closed is via reparations. In my book, I asked the readers to send a letter to their congressman, congresswoman, and I have a copy of a letter, a template for a letter, encouraging their congressman or congresswoman to support reparations be given to Black people who are 18 years and older, and in one check. And the amount would be the difference between white wealth, 170,000, and Black wealth, 17,000. So one check would go to Black people who are 18 years and older to the tune of $153,000. Japanese Americans got one check for $20,000 for 3 years. They were deserving of it. But one check would go to Black Americans, therefore bringing Black net worth equal to white net worth. If that happened, the cost in my approximation would be about $3 trillion, which is $1 trillion less than what the federal government paid to bail out the banks.
Right.
Our annual economy is about $21 trillion. America can afford to do this for Black people. Until something like this is done, the schism between Blacks and whites will always exist. I'm not an optimist and a blind optimist in the sense that things will inevitably get right. Only something intentionally will result in things getting right between Blacks and whites, just like things were done intentionally to create the schism and the development of the gap between Blacks and whites financially. So I am an ardent supporter of reparations. Some people may not believe in it. And if there's some Black people who are not supportive of it, but all I say is that's fine. I would be gladly willing to take your check if you don't want to get your check as well. And some people will say, my theme is one that sort of portrays us as victims. And I'm here to tell you, we were victims, that we need to stop letting people tell us that we weren't victims. We were victims. And as victims, you're entitled to some kind of financial compensation for righting a wrong that was done to you. So that's what I am on right there, Ms. Audrey.
Okay. That was very powerful. And I know that we have a number of questions in the chat and comments in the chat as well. Some that are in complete agreement and some not so.
That's fine.
That's fine, exactly. So I'm going to ask Veronica to share some of those questions and comments so that there's an opportunity for you to share a little bit more with us.
Okay. Thank you, Audrey. Mr. Rogers, we sincerely appreciate your passion for this topic area. And I want to start with a question that reads, as owner-operators of a Black-owned business, Chapter 5 of your book, Support Black-Owned Businesses, was most appealing to my husband and me. In your brief historical account of the 1898 events that occurred in Wilmington, North Carolina, you state, despite all of that prosperity, there were still limitations on how much wealth Blacks could amass. As we know, this statement is applicable today. Yes, we've come a long way, despite all the sophisticated tactics that continue to limit how much wealth Blacks can amass. Stephen, what encouragement would you offer today's Black business owners? And how can our white colleagues and friends continue to be a part of our success story?
Thank you very much for reading the book. And I like the fact that you cited Chapter 5. And let me just say this about the book. You know, it says a letter and it sounds therefore it's like it's a narrative, but this book is more than a narrative. It is chock full of data, research, empirical history. And so it's not just simply a narrative. It is a book that is a call to action and that is filled with factual data and information. Black-owned businesses have a fascinating history, and that is Black entrepreneurs have always been those who have been successful. What we've seen is a history of when Black businesses are successful, whites inevitably get jealous and they do something and there's a backlash. And so one thing that Black people are typically taught is that if you're successful as a Black-owned business owner, keep it down low. You know, there were Black business owners in Durham, North Carolina, who literally said, and Durham, North Carolina used to be the epicenter, at one time, the epicenter for Black-owned businesses, just like Tulsa, Oklahoma was at one time. But Black-owned business owners in Durham, North Carolina said, I will never build a building that's taller than a white-owned building, because if white people see that I'm successful, they will do something to hurt my business. And what we see is that sometimes, and you cited the Wilmington example, they will literally attack businesses. We know that was the case in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. Tulsa, Oklahoma, as we well know, was Black Wall Street, the epicenter of Black-owned businesses. 10,000 Black folks lived there, 600 Black-owned businesses. That was a 15-to-1 ratio of residents to number of businesses. If you look at America today, there's about 300 million people, and then we have, I think, about 20 million businesses. So we almost have something similar in terms of residents to ratio, in terms of residents to number of business ratio. And so what you saw was Tulsa, Oklahoma, this great success that was occurring where people were able to take care of themselves. Jealous white people decided we're going to tear all of this down. And what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma happened in at least 100 other cities throughout the country when Black businesses were successful. That was then, and we still see evidence of it today. And that is Robert Smith, for example, when he gave all of that money to Morehouse College, the IRS went after him shortly after that. Some say that he probably gave the money to Morehouse because he knew the IRS was coming. But we also know that seemingly anytime somebody Black has had success and they use their success to help Black people, if they don't use their success to help Black people, they're left alone. If their only focus is themselves and symbolism, they're left alone. But if they decide they want to help Black people, we see a backlash occurring. And what we also know is, and I've written in this book, and I have a new book coming out on the 15th called Successful Black Entrepreneurs. What we know is, and we desperately need more Black entrepreneurs, we need them to grow. And we know that there's going to be a backlash. So oftentimes I tell Black people, don't be engaged in conspicuous consumption because white people are going to come after you, okay? What does that mean? It means different things to different people. Don't go out and buy a Rolls Royce and drive it around necessarily in that instance. That doesn't mean that you have to live in poverty or give it an image of poverty, but be aware that there's going to be a backlash, especially if you're an asset to the Black community. But what we know is, we know that Black entrepreneurs have one heck of a challenge. And the primary challenge is with the ability to grow. And the reason that they can't grow is because of lack of access to capital. In my book, Successful Black Entrepreneurs, I cite the fact that one Black business owner said, we'd be better off trying to raise money as Black people, Black business owners, from the lottery than going to banks and going to venture capital firms. I give examples in my book about research that was done by the University of Utah, the most white university in the country. And what they did was they sent Black business owners and white business owners, they were both actors. They dressed them exactly alike. They made sure that they were the same height, and they sent them in to banks to ask for business loans. In every instance where they sent them into banks to ask for business loan, the Black person's business, the Black person's financial circumstances were better than the white person's financial circumstances. In every one of those examples, the Black person didn't receive the loan, was treated poorly and everything. This was research done by the University of Utah that I show in my book and I cite in my book. And the purpose of it was to say, if Fox News heard me talking about Black people being denied debt financing, being denied equity financing, Fox News will say, well, maybe Black people are not qualified to get it. This research shows that Black people were qualified. Despite their qualifications, they were denied the money. And so we're not crazy when we say that we're not able to get money and the reason is because of race. There's evidence to show that to be true. And you go back to why are white businesses more successful and being able to be, one is they can access capital today, but also remember what I told you at the beginning, that transference of wealth. When you get a white high school dropout that has access to capital, that's what you need to be successful as a business owner. You need money because 80% of all business owners will pivot. They'll change what they were doing originally. And what do you need to pivot? You need money to pivot. Black people, we don't have the money. So we need whites to not only do business with Black-owned businesses, we need white people to open up the coffers and provide capital to Black people if they're in charge of Black people. And that's one, and I'll close after this. That's one of the reasons why I was insistent on writing case studies at Harvard Business School showing the brilliance of Black men and women. And let me tell you this, I never wrote any case study about a Black entertainer or a Black athlete. I think that that is a disservice to Black people for us to only be the only group that talks about entrepreneurial success being Black entertainers and athletes. What it says is that we have to be these super athletes, we have to be these great entertainers in order to have entrepreneurial success. And it downgrades the importance of intellectual brilliance and hard work. No other racial group talks about the importance of, cites Black entrepreneurs and then cites athletes or entertainers in that category. So I fight against that completely. I wrote about Black business leaders who were successful. My definition of a Black successful entrepreneur was a person not only who had commercial success, but a person who also gave back to the Black community. If you didn't give back to the Black community, I did not write case studies about you. I don't want you to be the role model for other young Black people to emulate, because we cannot afford for Black people not to give back. Our community is hurting, and Black entrepreneurs who are successful need to give back. So I wrote case studies about Valerie Daniel Carter, the sister in Milwaukee, who owns like 500 Burger Kings. She also owns part of the Milwaukee Bucks NBA team, the Green Bay Packers team. But more importantly, this Black woman has built a hospital right in the Black community, a health center right in the middle of the poor Black community in Milwaukee. She's built a hospital in Africa, but she's done stuff in the United States, credit unions in the Black community and everything. Those are the type of successful Black people that I wrote about. And I wrote about them not only so that Black people would see role models, but so that white people would see role models. So that white people who are in charge of doling out money or giving loans or providing financing for venture capital, they would say, you know what, I did see a story about brilliant Black entrepreneurs when I was in business school. Mm-hmm. And I saw stories about Black entrepreneurs who weren't athletes, who weren't entertainers. So that when we do approach them, it is not something that is an anomaly. And so we need Black people, we need white folks who have keys to the vault to open those vaults up to give the Black entrepreneurs so that they can grow.
Excellent, excellent. Veronica, do you have another question for us?
Yes, I do. Mr. Rogers, this question is regarding HBCUs. Do you have a recommendation for specific ways to donate to HBCUs?
Great question.
To particular scholarship funds or to a general fund?
Super
or
question.
Is there a way that money directed some places can make more of an impact?
Beautiful question, beautiful question. In my book, I identify the 101 HBCUs, and I also identify the development office. I give you the email address and a link so that you can go directly to the development office if you wanted to make a donation to that particular school. When you think about donations, we tend to think about donations in schools that have something that's sort of meaningful to us. You know, I'm the father of 2 daughters. And so I do everything that I can, not just simply because I'm a father of 2 daughters, but we know that fathers of daughters tend to have more of a proclivity to do things that support women than those who are not fathers and brothers and of daughters and sisters. But that's why I fell in love with Bennett College, an all-female school. There's other places that people would say that they would donate because the school has a great science program or a great program in theaters, and that's perfectly fine. But in my book, I help you find and identify the development offices for each one of those schools that you can contact to query them about how do you make the donation directly to them, or how should the money, or how would they prefer that the money be donated to you. I'll say this, in addition to me donating money to HBCUs, I have in my alma maters, Little White Liberal Arts College, Williams College, and I have a Black Student Union Scholarship. This is my family's name. And the Black Student Union Scholarship is for those who are leaders of the Black Student Union, who are leaders of the Black Student Union who have financial need. I was emphatic that I didn't want my money to go to Black people who didn't want to serve Black people, that they only had an interest in themselves. So the way that I determined that was saying, if you are a leader in the Black Student Union, that gives me a sense that you have an interest in helping Black people.
I think that's a great idea. Sometimes monies that go through the development office or whatever the designated office is, and maybe to a foundation, pot or general pot, may not reach the type of student that you're trying to reach. So I think it's a great idea to try to designate, think through who it is that you really want to support, and then designate that money so that it goes right there instead of maybe to a general pot or a foundation where only a little piece of the money is going to be used every year because the foundation isn't big enough, you know, to give a whole lot of money. So designation is a great idea, I think. Are there any comments, Veronica, that you would like to share with Steve so that he can respond to them?
Some general comments were powerful presentation, well put together.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I did see one comment about a reason that maybe supporting Black businesses may not work because, these are my words, it's not the writer's words, but the perception that I took away from it was that there's in some situations, Black folks may not have the particular business sense, or they may not, you know, show up on time, or they may do this or they may do that.
Right.
And that sounds like, you know, reasons why we shouldn't support Black business. So I wanted you to just give some thought and some comments on that.
Right. I don't believe that Black people are any less capable of running a business than white people. I think we tend to be hard on each other sometimes, needlessly, as Black people. And we go and sometimes we'll go to a place. That's why I don't want to come to a Black-owned restaurant, because they're so slow. Well, I've gone to white-owned restaurants that are extremely slow as well. And therefore, I don't believe that we are any less qualified than anybody else in any other group. I do believe that many times we don't have the financial resources of other groups, and that may result in us not being able to do certain things with our business. But I am a strong believer that Black brilliance exists. I support Black brilliance, and if you can shine a light on it, it will come through. And Black business owners are my personal heroes and sheroes because they create jobs for people. We know that to be a fact. And you'll never, in my opinion, go wrong for supporting a Black-owned business. It may be a particular person that you've disliked or you didn't have a good experience with, but you won't have necessarily that with all Black-owned businesses. And let me say this, and that is, it is imperative that we love ourselves and that we love our people, and that we realize that things that were done to us have resulted in some of the behavioral issues that we sometimes see amongst our people. And it was done to us sometimes intentionally so that we can have these kind of experience with other people. But I am the biggest supporter of Black-owned businesses. I'm the biggest supporter of Black people who do anything to help Black people. I was asked, and I did a session this morning for all state insurance companies similar to this. And I was asked about optimism. And my answer was, I'm not a blind optimist. And I think I said this when I came on board. I do believe in faith, and I'm a believer in God, but I also believe in action. And Pastor said something earlier that talked about this being a ministry and a church that focuses on action. I don't go very heavily into symbolism, because we as a Black people, we need help. We need help, and we need those who have the means to do, we need them to do. I believe in the W.E.B. Du Bois's talented 10th philosophy, and that is those of us who are capable are obligated to pull up others. Other races do exactly the same thing, and we need to do the same thing. And I've admonished, quite frankly, many Black wealthy people for not giving back as much as I believe that they should. And sometimes people say, Steve, you're too hard on people, on Black people who are successful. Maybe they give back, but they don't ever say anything to it. Maybe it's not publicized. And I always respond, our Black community cannot afford for you to be quiet. We need to hear and know what you're doing, because we need role models. And the other thing, especially with athletes and entertainers, my position is, for the most part, we know what they want us to know. If they were philanthropic, they typically would tell us, okay? And they would brag about it and everything. But many of them, unfortunately, are not. And part of the reason many of them are not, unfortunately, is because they're surrounded by whites who don't have a commitment to our community, and they make their decisions for them. So I don't put a whole lot of value and importance to relying on them. I like to speak to just the average everyday person to say, let's help ourselves, and let's help ourselves by demanding those three things that I've just mentioned, as well as reparations. And some people, for example, of reparations have said, you know, Steve, soon as Black people, if they got that money, you know they're going to waste it. My comment about that is, so what?
Right.
So what? That's paternalism to think that we're not entitled to waste. White people waste money, as well as my only condition that I would put on the check for $153,000 is that everyone must take one class, not 10 classes, just one class on personal financial management. And that the check would come in one payment, not installments, because if it's installments, the vultures will come out and start saying, I'll give you 50 cents for every dollar that you're owned in the future. I believe that Black people have the right to mess over money if that's what they end up doing, just the same as white people. But I don't believe that that is what will happen. And so I am a person who is, and I explicitly state this in the book, I'm a race man. My entire life is devoted to the uplifting of the poor Black community. I'm not subtle about it. I don't infer certain things. I am very explicitly focused on the uplifting of Black people. I serve on the board of several Fortune 500 companies. And some of the criticisms that come my way is Steve speaks too much about racism. And for me, for a white person to say that, that's a compliment.
Wonderful. The clock on the wall says I'm supposed to turn this over to Dr. Boyd at this point, but before I do that, I want to personally say thank you, Mr. Rogers, for a fantastic, educational, informative presentation today. I learned a lot reading the book. I learned even more listening to you, and I love your passion that you bring. I love your non-apologetic side.
Amen.
And I look forward to being in your company again. Dr.
That's
Boyd?
nice of you to say. Thank you very much. I loved your interview. Thank you, Miss Oprah. Audrey.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We've had an exciting, informative, and compelling forum with Mr. Stephen S. Rogers, a race man, a modern race man. And I hope you're fired up. I told you to hold on to your seats. I told you you were going to be pushed, and we received all of that. Let me first ask, before I continue with my thank yous, if everyone would please go to the QR code and please fill out the evaluation. It really helps us to narrow down the presentations that we will bring, the informative presentations, the historical presentations, as we have heard so much about history and statistics, empirical data that will help us to make the case, help us to understand amongst ourselves. And so please do fill out the evaluation and let us know who you are and what you thought about the forum on tonight. As we move forward, let me thank everyone for joining us on tonight, taking time from your schedule and being with us tonight for this exciting forum. I'm going to ask everyone, I'm going to ask Mr. Rogers, if you would please go to the gallery view on your computer. And then I'm going to ask everyone if you in your own way will give a rousing applause to Mr. Rogers. If you want to, you can hold up your book and let him know you bought the book and you're reading it or you're going to read it. Send a heart, send the emoji in the chat, send hand claps, send thumbs up. Let him know how you enjoyed the event on tonight. We want to thank him. Author, professor, entrepreneur extraordinaire. We want to thank you on behalf of the work that you do for the Black community, for the heart of this nation. Thank you for guiding us through how to have meaningful conversations with our white friends and colleagues about the wealth gap in this nation and how it occurred and how we together can mitigate it. We are grateful and ready to do the work. to ensure equity and justice for all in this country, ready to work to eliminate the wealth gap in this country. And so we thank you so much for your presence, for your presentation, for your book, for your heart, just for your caring and your love, and for your action on behalf of Black people in this community. We want to thank our participants again. Our goal in the social justice ministry, as Audrey mentioned, is to inform, to incite a sense of urgency to take action, and then to advise you, to give you a place where you can put your energy into action to affect change. We want to thank our visionary pastor, Dr. Henry P. Davis III, for his continued leadership and support. We want to thank our phenomenal media team, our tech lead, Sister Veronica Jacobs, our media team lead for the church, Brother Joel Price, our volunteers, Lisa Gaffney and Denise McCann, and our social justice ministry members who are also supporting the technology on tonight, Faye Nelson and Levon Harper. Without them, this event would not have been able to take place. They have provided security and convenience and comfort for us on tonight. We also want to thank our awesome social justice ministry members who have worked hard to support this event and all of the work that we do in order to help our immediate community to address any of the injustices that we may be experiencing. And last but not least, if we can give a great round of applause, a big thank you to Mrs. Audrey Chase, our Vice President for the Social Justice Ministry, and Mrs. Veronica Jacobs, our tech lead. These two women are the wind beneath the wings of this fabulous, phenomenal forum. Thank you for all the work that you did to make this event come alive. Finally, the Social Justice Ministry has several events planned for 2022. We will have a domestic violence, sexual assault awareness workshop in partnership with the Progressive Life Center in early May. And backed by popular demand, we will have 2 Civics 101 workshops, one on April the 28th and the other on July 28th. Please watch the church website, www.fbhp.org, for information about these upcoming events. That concludes our forum for this evening. Mr. Rogers, if you have anything that you would like to say as we close out. Can't get to mine. Okay. Pastor Davis, are you on? Would you like to bring closing comments?
Certainly, it has been outstanding, terrific, and Stephen Rogers is brilliant. And of course, I have the book, and I'm looking forward to reading it in totality. But just listening to his very engaging discussion and really giving us real action steps to take. And so I just want to thank him for his passion. And it makes some of us feel like slugs, but that's okay. We just gonna pick up the pace, but we need this kind of challenging and stretching because that's what makes us stronger, makes us better. And so thank you, Mr. Rogers, for sharing with us. Brilliant, Professor Rogers. I think Mr. Rogers don't make you too small, but you are absolutely brilliant. And thank you for what you're doing, because you're shaping so many lives and impacting, really making a global impact. And so we can be grateful for that kind of energy. So I want to thank the Social Justice Ministry for coming up with this wonderful idea. And of course, in Black History Month, and then you get someone during Black History Month who's able to come and share in such a powerful way. I also want to thank those colleagues and others who have shared, and non-Blacks who are also joining us tonight. Thank you for your presence tonight. Everyone does not have that ability to be able to merge right in, but we want to thank you also for being a part of our gathering tonight, because what we do is something that is certainly open to one and all. And so thank you, Dr. Boyd, for allowing us to share comment tonight.
Thank you, Pastor. I'm going to ask if you would give us a word of benediction, but before you do that, I just want to encourage everyone. Professor Rogers' book includes information about how to do how to enact, how to be engaged, how to accomplish every one of his recommendations. They can't see it because of the background. So please do, if you have not purchased the book, please do purchase it. He didn't leave us hanging with recommendations with no action, no how-tos. How-tos are in the book, and he gave us a lot of history. That is just a snippet of what's actually in the book. So please do purchase the book. Pastor, over to you for the benediction. Thank you, everyone, and God bless.